Shall we mix it up? David Goodfriend, Democratic strategist and former Clinton White House staffer Matt Lewis, a blogger and columnist at politicsdaily.com. What are the implications from a U.S. diplomatic standpoint, not just with Egypt, but with Israel and the balance of the Middle East, from being the known bankroll and prime ally and arms supplier? The tear gas canisters, the guns, the F-16s are all American-made and bought with American tax money, while claiming to be the agent of freedom in the Middle East, David Goodfriend.
Well, I look at these pictures and I'm just as distressed as everybody else. I just came back from the Middle East a little over 2 weeks ago, where I traveled in Jordan and in Israel and right up to the Egyptian border. At the time, of course, we all thought everything was very peaceful. And it seemed as though there was a lot of economic activity as a result of peace agreements between Jordan and Israel, between Egypt and Israel. But what's clear to me, as a citizen here, the same thing that makes me a progressive here in the United States, that I believe that we're all better off when wealth pervades the whole society and isn't concentrated at the top, that concept applies as well overseas. Yes, there's a positive economic benefit to a peace agreement. Yes, the more both parties prosper, the more lasting the peace agreement is. But if within that society, the wealth and the benefits of any arrangement are concentrated at the top, it's unsustainable. And I think that's, more than anything else, the lesson that we're drawing from this. The United States is in it. It does provide over $1 billion a year in aid to the Egyptian military, which by all accounts is the only lasting institution in Egypt at the moment. And we have to be able to translate that level of support into support for democracy. I don't think the administration here has been doing anything outside of what either political party here in the United States would do. It's interesting to note, Gillen, politics really has ended at the water's edge on this one. When you hear John McCain and John Boehner saying, okay, we think the Obama administration is doing pretty good, that says to me, we're on to some new territory here where you're not seeing political sniping internally. However, there's no question, in my mind or anybody else's mind, the only way to think this thing is going to be resolved in a way that benefits the whole region is if you have buy-in from the population at large, and that means prosperity shared.
Matt Lewis, how does the United States claim to be the advocate of freedom in its own country or around the world when it is so clearly being outed right now as the bankroll of an oppressor? Granted, it was an oppressor who was allied with our political interests, and so we were okay with it. But clearly, freedom is not the driving agenda of American foreign policy if you look at 30 years and $50 billion for a man who has 40% of his population living on $2 a day.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. I think right now President Obama and America are damned if they do, damned if they don't, frankly. And I do think it's tough. I mean, look, democracy is messy. Diplomacy is messy. And if you told me that in the Middle East, with all the problems that we've had in the last 30 years, that we could have in Egypt for 30 years where there would be stability, where there would be a peace with Israel, but it might end very badly, that still might not be a bad deal for America to have taken. 30 years of stability. Again, there is no perfect world. I'm not utopian. I don't believe in the perfectibility of man. We're always going to have wars and rumors of wars. Having said that, I think that now we're in a very dangerous position. President Obama is also politically in a very dangerous position. You cannot support Mubarak. By the way, John McCain on Twitter 10 minutes ago called for him to actually step down immediately. You can't support this dictator, but simultaneously America can't throw him under the bus because he has been an ally. And by the way, let me also say, I think that if Mubarak leaves, and it looks like he's going to leave, my prediction is things will get worse for Israel. For Israel and Egypt, not better. It is very likely that the next person, we don't know who that is. It's probably, best case scenario, there's some sort of an interim government, maybe with Mohammed el-Baradei. But but it could very, very likely disintegrate. The Muslim Brotherhood could have much more influence. You could see an anti-American regime, an anti-Israel regime. It's very easy to watch these protests and to support and root for the people who want freedom. I understand that. But what happens next? Nobody knows the answer to that.
If I could just jump in, I really agree with something you just said, and it's something I actually heard when I was traveling in the Middle East, which is there is both a hope for democracy within the Arab world. I'm speaking now about within Israel, and yet a fear that who would come to power? Would it become another Iran? Would it become another totalitarian state? That fear of the unknown, I think, is driving a lot of apprehension. I agree with you. I actually think that there's a risk of retrenchment, but I also think that, to Dylan's point, we can't as a nation, we can't as the United States keep investing in repression as the way to achieve stability. That's a bad investment. And I think what we're... No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. I mean, I agree with you, and I think you make a very good point. I do want to make another point, though, because this is a larger debate over whether or not America should support, like, say, pro-American leaders in South America, or whether or not America should always be on the side of freedom. Let's not forget President Bush and his, freedom agenda was widely mocked by a lot of realists, by a lot of people as being quixotic. We saw what happened in Lebanon when Hezbollah, who wins fair and square elections. So this is a big debate that transcends Egypt. And I do think that some of the people, I'm not accusing you of this, but I think some of the same people who today are calling for the ouster of Mubarak and critical of America, mocked Bush and the neocons for their freedom agenda.
I did mock Bush and I did mock the neocons, not for promoting a freedom agenda, but for doing it at the barrel of a gun. I mean, that's not how you promote.
I don't want to get into the Bush aspect. I don't want to rehash history at this moment. What I do want to get into, though, is the following. Is it a matter of whether the U.S., whether it is pro-American dictators or an anti-American democracy, which is sort of what we're talking about, that's the debate you two were just having, or is the real question whether it is a democracy or a dictatorship if it's an economic system where the banking system and the industrial policy, whether it's a dictator or a democracy, pro or anti anybody, if it is based on consolidated wealth among the elite and widespread unemployment and tax harvesting from the vast majority of the population, which is the de facto economic structure in the Middle East, for that matter in China, and for that matter in a lot of other countries around the world. America has its own degree of that, fortunately not to the same degree in many other countries, but is not that the core issue? Forget the mechanism of government. As long as you believe in allowing those with power to manipulate resources to the deprivation of food and employment and housing to the unwashed mass, this is what you're dealing with.
Yes, Dylan. Yes, yes, and yes. That is the issue here, and that's why I said in my opening remarks, the concentration of wealth at the top is the enemy. I don't care if it's the United States, where we've seen a reversal of the growth of the middle class, an increasing concentration of wealth in the top 1-2% of the population, or if it's Egypt, or if it's Saudi Arabia or China or anywhere else. The concentration of wealth among a few people at the top is a dangerous recipe. The thing that's made the United States such a lasting democracy, in addition to our great Constitution, is the fact that we have had such a large and growing middle class.
All right. A wonderful conversation. It's always a pleasure to have both of you, David Goodfriend and Matt Lewis. We continue to intensely monitor the events in Cairo as we work our way into the evening. Our coverage, of course, continuing on MSNBC into the evening here in North America. We will take a momentary break as we all watch not only the unfolding events between the protesters and the pro-Mubarak activists who have taken to the streets violently so in the past 24 hours, we continue to watch our own government attempt to walk the high wire of its history of financial and military support for the dictator and its simultaneous rhetoric of freedom for all that is at the core culture of this country's founding. Chuck Todd with us after this as he continues to try to evaluate and continue his reporting as to what the White House's and the U.S. government's next move will be in this high wire act.